An ordinary court hearing unexpectedly turns into the beginning of the biggest exposé in the city's history. A 3-year-old boy makes a gesture that sets off a chain of shocking events. A prosecutor begins an investigation that uncovers a criminal network within the justice system itself. Where adults remained silent, a child points out the truth, and it changes everything. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories. On Tuesday morning, the Silverdale County Circuit Courthouse was tensely quiet, as if the building itself were holding its breath, waiting for something important to happen. The light was dim through the wide windows. The spring sun had not yet gained its strength, but it touched the stained glass windows softly, leaving spots of pink and amber on the varnished benches. The air smelled of old wood, leather from the files, and a hint of cheap soap, all of which combined to create an elusive mixture that could have been the scent of justice itself. The judge had not yet entered, but the crowd was already gathering. Lawyers whispering in the corner, men in suits anxiously leafing through papers, someone tapping their heels on the marble floor. Sophie Watson walked carefully along the wall, holding her son's hand. Noah leaned forward, holding a small fire engine in his other hand, bright red, with plastic wheels that squeaked with every step. He had just turned 3, and everything in this room seemed huge and mysterious to him. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling looked like castles from a fairy tale. He raised his head to get a better look, and the car slipped from his hand, hitting the wooden floor with a dull thud. The echo rolled through the room, and several people turned around. Sophie quickly leaned over, picked up the toy, and whispered, "Noah, be quiet. We're only here for a short while, okay?" "It's beautiful here," he said, looking up. "Is this a palace?" "Almost," she smiled. "Only in this palace are destinies decided." They sat down in the second pew from the aisle. Sophie clutched a folder of papers to her chest. She had been called as a witness to a robbery that had happened 6 months earlier. The vintage furniture store, her own business, was the place from which she had seen everything, from behind the window. She had long hesitated about taking her son with her, but there was no one to leave him with. Judge Garrett Holmes, after a brief conversation with an assistant, reluctantly allowed her to enter with the child. A slight noise ran through the room as a side door opened and the duty officers began to file in. One by one, they took their places along the walls, strictly according to protocol. Sophie glanced at them and turned away. She tried to concentrate on her thoughts about the testimony, on the words she was repeating to herself. But suddenly, she felt Noah tense up. He froze, sitting upright. The typewriter stopped in his hands. The boy stared ahead, unblinking. His face changed. The childish lightness disappeared. There was something adult in his gaze, something incomprehensible. "Mom," he whispered. "It's him." Sophie was at a loss. "Who, darling?" "It's him!" The voice became louder. "He was there." He raised his hand and pointed his finger directly at one of the officers, the one who stood slightly apart from the others, his eyes downcast. The man was a strong man, with a square jaw and stern features, but at that moment he noticeably paled. His right leg trembled, and he retreated half a step, as if he wanted to hide in his own shadow. A deathly silence fell over the courtroom. Several heads turned first to the boy, then to the officer. Even the hum of the courtroom squabbles died down. Prosecutor Julian Ray, sitting at the far table, looked up. He noticed at once. The officer's reaction was not that of an accidental defendant. It was fear, real, thick, like a shadow filling his face. Judge Holmes finally entered, frowning slightly. "What's going on here?" "Excuse me, Your Honor," Ray said, rising. "I ask for a short recess." Holmes looked around the room with a heavy gaze and nodded. 10-minute break. Officer Maddox, come to my quarters. Now. The officer Noah had pointed out walked forward slowly, his steps uneven. Sophie felt that tremor again, the same one she had felt that night when she had hidden behind the register and heard someone limping across the broken display case. While the room was clearing, the prosecutor approached her. "Miss Watson," he said softly, "may I speak to you for a moment?" "Certainly. Why did your son react like that?" I don't know. We just came to testify." He had never seen this officer before. "Did you see the robbers?" "They were wearing masks. But one—" She hesitated. "One of them was limping, on his right leg." Ray nodded, his face tense. He turned and made a subtle signal to the duty officer at the door. He stood up and quietly closed the lock. At that moment, Sophie realized that something much bigger than her personal business was about to begin. Noah sat quietly, fiddling with the toy again. His face was carefree again, but when footsteps were heard in the hallway and Maddox's name was mentioned again, he flinched and clutched the car tightly to his chest. The courtroom did not return to its previous state. It had already absorbed that very thing, a child's gesture, a simple finger pointing, which, as it turned out, contained a truth capable of shaking the system. In the far corner, someone whispered, "It was like a movie, but it all really happened." And it all started with a 3-year-old boy who simply pointed and said, "That's him." The windows of Judge Garrett Holmes's office overlooked an old sycamore park, where the spring wind lazily stirred the few remaining leaves. The heavy curtains were open, and the light flooded the wooden table covered with green baize, highlighting every wrinkle on the face of a man accustomed to seeing lies in their most refined forms. He sat with his back straight, his hands folded in front of him, and watched intently as Officer Maddox walked in slowly, still limping slightly. He avoided the judge's gaze, his eyes darting around the room as if hoping to find a way out among the shelves of codes. "Sergeant," said Holmes, his voice level but warning, "do you understand why I asked you to come?" "No, Your Honor," Maddox replied, clearing his throat. "It all happened so suddenly. The kid, he probably got something mixed up. You were surprised. You turned pale and stepped back. Why? I just didn't expect it." He screamed. Everyone looked. I was confused. Holmes did not answer immediately. He turned his gaze to the prosecutor, Julian Ray, who was standing by the window and silently watching the conversation. "Prosecutor Ray," the judge finally said, "is there anything you'd like to add?" "Yes, Your Honor," Julian said quietly, not taking his eyes off the street. "We've checked the records. Sergeant Maddox was the first on the scene of the robbery that Miss Watson witnessed. He conducted the interviews, wrote up the reports, made the arrests. And this isn't the first time he's been involved in similar cases. I've ordered a review of all the cases for the last 5 years, where he's listed as the first responder." Maddox went even paler. He sank into a chair, exhaling heavily. "This is absurd," he muttered. "You trust a 3-year-old child more than a police officer?" "I trust the reaction," Ray said firmly. "And yours, too." At that moment, a court clerk entered the room and handed the judge a thin folder. Holmes glanced at the documents and frowned. "D, Sergeant. It shows you've been to the scene of 8 different robberies in the last 2 years. In 5 of them, witnesses mentioned a suspect with a limp, and all of those were cases in which you conducted initial interviews." Maddox didn't answer. He stared at the floor, his fingers clenched into fists. "No one is accusing you yet," the judge added, "but in the interests of justice, you will be suspended from duty during the investigation. From now on, I ask you to remain in the courthouse until the end of the procedure." Do you understand everything? Silence. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall broke the silence. Then Maddox nodded slightly. Meanwhile, in the courtroom hallway, Sophie sat on a wooden bench, holding her son close. Noah had fallen asleep in her lap, his cheeks warm, his eyelashes fluttering in his sleep. She stroked his hair, trying not to think about what had just happened. She heard the prosecutor talking to the judge, and she felt everything around her shift, as if the floor beneath her feet was shifting. Julian approached her, now without folders and without assistance, just a man who was haunted by instinct. Miss Watson, I must thank you, and your son. He's just a kid, she said quietly. He doesn't even understand what happened. Or maybe that's why he saw what the adults didn't, Ray replied. Instinct, purity of perception. We're used to doubting, but children just look and talk. Do you think it's him? It's too early to say. But I sense that underneath all this, there's more than just a coincidence. I've been working in the prosecutor's office for almost 20 years. I know what fear looks like. Maddox wasn't confused. He was caught. He sat down next to her, folding his hands. We'll start an investigation. If everything is confirmed, it will be a much more serious matter than a robbery. It will be a conspiracy. Sophie looked at him, her lips pressed together. I was afraid then, 6 months ago. When I saw the silhouette at the shop window, I heard the steps and that limping rhythm. But I didn't even think about it then. The police arrived 3 minutes later, and he was the first one in. Are you sure you didn't see the face then? No face, but her gait. I recognized her today. Ray nodded and stood up. We will provide you with protection, temporary accommodation. Don't worry. He walked away, leaving her alone. It was starting to rain outside, light, almost transparent. It tapped on the glass as if it were washing the courthouse, trying to wash away the traces of invisible fear. Noah stirred, pressing closer to his mother. She kissed the top of his head and whispered, Everything will be fine, baby. You just told the truth, and the truth is not a crime. At this time, at the other end of the building, in the archive room, Prosecutor Ray gave the order. Pull up all the cases Sergeant Maddox was involved in, especially the suburban robbery complaints. See if any of the same names keep popping up. Also, give me a list of the officers he's worked with on patrol over the last 10 years. One of the employees, a young woman with blonde hair, looked up from the screen. Do you think this is a network? I think so, and if I'm wrong, so much the better. But I don't want anyone else to suffer just because someone in uniform decided they were above the law. He fell silent. Through the glass partition, I could see the guards in the lobby taking down Maddox's nameplate. In a world where everything was based on trust, a 3-year-old boy had destroyed it with one word. And perhaps with that same word, he had started something better. The Silverdale County District Attorney's Office was a hive of activity, buzzing and clicking and phones ringing, doors opening and closing so frequently that the building seemed to have a disturbing life of its own. In a filing room filled with the smell of paper, old paint, and coffee, District Attorney Julian Ray stood at a long table piled high with files. His jacket was off, his shirt was open, and sweat was beading on his forehead. He barely blinked as he peered down the rows of names, dates, and opinions. On the table in front of him were 9 cases, each marked not proven or suspect released. Each had one thing in common: the inclusion of Sergeant Blake Maddox as the first officer to arrive at the scene. Right here, said Assistant District Attorney Allison Marsh, running her finger down the document. 3 years ago, robbery of a private home. Victim, pensioner, name Frederick Hall. Described assailant as a man wearing a mask, but noted that he was limping. Maddox arrived 4 minutes later, made no arrests. Case closed a day later. No evidence. Next, Julian said shortly. Bookshop on Benson Street. She leafed through the folder. Masked criminals. Owner, an elderly woman. Again, the limp. Again, Maddox first on the scene. Suspect found, but later acquitted. An airtight alibi. It's not a coincidence anymore, Ray said, leaning his hands on the table. It's a pattern. He turned to the window. The street below seemed different, where cars usually rustled. People ran. Students drank coffee. Now there was an alien silence. He felt everything in him resisting this truth, but experience spoke louder. Crime is not always a mask and a knife. Sometimes it is a tie, shoulder straps, and access to information. We need more, he said. Find records of financial activity, transfers, purchases he couldn't afford, cars, vacation homes, safe deposit boxes, everything. I've already requested it. The answer will be in the evening. Ray nodded. He felt a quiet fire burning inside him, the feeling he had at the most important moments in his career. Not fear, but tense anticipation. An intuition like the ringing in his ears before a storm. Later, in the darkened room where they worked with the video archives, Julian sat in front of a screen and watched the CCTV footage. It was from Sophie's store. The camera, mounted on the corner, had captured the moment when a figure in a dark jacket and mask flashed across the frame. It had lasted no longer than 3 seconds, but the gait, quick with a slight shift of weight to the left leg, was clearly visible. He replayed the scene again, then again. "Prosecutor," Allison called softly from behind him. "We found something." A folder landed on the table. It contained bank statements, accounts registered in the names of fictitious companies, Westbridge Trade, Gold Line Invest, Red Rock Consult. All were opened in different states, but the transfers came from the same route, and each transfer was made neatly a day or two after the latest robbery. The amounts? From 20 to 50,000. How much in total? According to rough estimates, more than 3 million. Ray sat up slowly. It's not one person. It's a structure. We checked the connections. Maddox often patrolled with 2 other officers, James Hawke and Lester Reeves. The latter retired a year ago. The former is still around. Now, Judge Randall Staten... She hesitated. He was assigned to most of these cases. He made the decisions to release suspects in almost all of them. "Judge?" Julian repeated quietly. "Are you sure?" "More than that. And that's not all. We found a closed complaint filed by Officer Harry Wilson 7 years ago. He suspected collusion within the department. The complaint disappeared. 2 months later, he was fired for non-compliance." Ray stood up. The noise in his head became almost palpable. "I want to talk to this Wilson. Find him. Immediately." As Allison left, he walked over to the board, which now featured photographs of suspects, maps, arrows, and notes. In the center of the board was a photograph of Noah. The boy was holding his fire engine, his face bright, slightly confused. He was looking straight into the lens, as if he were unconsciously looking into the essence. Meanwhile, in the safe house provided by the agency, Sophie washed dishes, glancing at her son playing in the corner. Noah was building a tower of soft blocks and humming. Everything about the apartment felt foreign. The furniture was neutral, the walls were painted gray, the smells were sterile, but Sophie felt only gratitude, for the safety, for not being abandoned. There was a knock at the door. She jumped, but saw Allison through the peephole. "The prosecutor asks you to come. We have found a witness." An hour later, they were sitting in a separate room in the prosecutor's office building. There, in a chair opposite them, sat a man, balding, with a thick gray stubble, thin, but with a straight back. Harry Wilson. "I knew this day would come," he said, not looking at Sophie. "I tried to tell you." No one listened. "Tell us," Ray said quietly. It all started with little hints. At first, Maddox would just disappear on calls. Then complaints would come in. People would claim to have seen him near robberies before they happened. Then I found evidence that had disappeared after it fell into the hands of his partner. I wrote a report. A week later, I was called to the boss and told either silence or dismissal. "Why didn't you go to the press?" I was afraid. I had a granddaughter then. I chose silence. Sophie clasped her hands and said, "But now you can fix it." He looked at her. There was something alive in his eyes, tired, but determined. "Yes. Now. Yes." The prosecutor stood up. "We will begin the operation. But we need to be careful. These people are experienced, and if we make even one mistake, they will disappear." "Do you really think you'll catch them?" Sophie asked. Ray looked at the board with Noah's photo. "I think the boy has already taken the first step. The rest is up to us." Evening was approaching. Outside the windows, the sky was turning orange over the city, and on the roof of the building where the prosecutor's office was sitting, the wind was fluttering the American flag. There was still a lot of unknown ahead, but at that moment, everyone on the team felt that the real hunt had begun. The town of Silverdale looked different at dawn. Even the most decrepit buildings seemed new in the morning light, as if the night had washed away their weariness and noise. A light fog hung over the streets, through which the first rays of sunlight filtered, painting the brick facades a soft peach color. The courthouse square, so recently bustling, was empty. Only a few people hurried about their business, unaware that within the sandstone walls, what would later be called a turning point in the county's history, was beginning. Inside, the prosecutor's conference room was quiet and collected. The room was filled with papers, laptops, maps. On the wall hung a large board with red strings of photos, documents, diagrams, everything related to the case of Maddox and his accomplices. In the center was a photo of Noah. A small boy with warm eyes, holding his fire truck, seemed to look through it all. Prosecutor Julian Ray stood by the window holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He watched a school bus pass by, a woman in a tracksuit walk her dog, the world go on, unaware that somewhere beneath its thin veneer lurked a dark web of betrayal. "Is everyone ready?" he asked, without turning around. "Yes," Allison said, adjusting her earpiece and checking the warrant folder. "We've got surveillance. Hawk and Reeves are under control. Staton's not leaving the house yet. Maddox has an interview scheduled for 10 o'clock. Is everything still on?" Ray placed the cup on the windowsill and nodded. "Today, everything should start. But we do it according to the rules. Without pressure. Only facts. Only laws. We will not be like them." Meanwhile, Sophie sat in a secure room next to Noah, who was molding funny figures out of soft mass. He had long since settled into his new place, but every time a door slammed somewhere, he would flinch and look around. His little fingers moved deftly, creating new characters out of a lump of plastic mass, and each one reflected someone from the world around him. Here was a figure with a red hat. This, according to him, was the prosecutor. Here was a tall man with a crutch, the bad guy. And here was the smallest one, smiling, with long hair. He said that this was Mom. "Noah, do you want a drink?" Sophie asked, holding a glass of water. "Yes. And then I want to show you my castle. You will definitely show it." She smiled, but there was anxiety in her eyes. Something important was going to happen today. She could feel it with her skin. It happens like that before a storm. The sky is still light, but there is already a tension in the air that is impossible not to notice. Sergeant Maddox entered the courthouse unaccompanied. He was dressed in civilian clothes, a dark coat, a neat shirt, and a folder of papers in his hands. His face remained impassive, but his eyes darted about, as if trying to discern the silhouettes of the passers-by as an impending threat. In the corridor, he ran into Julian Ray. "Good morning," said the prosecutor. "It's just like any other morning," Maddox replied, clutching the folder. "I hope this is all a misunderstanding." "We hope so too," Ray answered calmly. "Let's go." The interrogation room was bare. White walls, a table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner. Allison was there too, turning on the recording and sitting down opposite. Maddox put the folder on the table, placing his hands next to it. "Are you sure you want to do this without a lawyer?" Julian asked. "I'm sure I didn't break the law. I have nothing to hide." "Good. Then let's begin." The interrogation lasted almost 2 hours. The questions were precise. The evidence was irrefutable. Julian showed the records, pointed out coincidences, asked about connections to companies. Maddox denied it. His confidence was cracking at the seams, but he held on. "Tell me," Ray finally asked, handing him a printout from the surveillance camera, "do you recognize this gate?" On the screen, a man in a mask with a backpack limped out of the camera's field of view. Maddox didn't answer. "We know it was you. You know it, and I know it. We have witnesses. We have money transferred to the accounts of companies registered in the names of the deceased. We have a former officer willing to testify. The only thing we don't have yet is your confession." Silence. "Do you understand what will happen next?" He looked up. There was something broken in them, burned out from the inside. "I didn't do everything alone," he said at last. "I'll tell you the names, but you must guarantee protection for my family. If you cooperate, we will consider this possibility. Speak, name after name. Hawk, Reeves, Judge Staten, 3 more officers, 1 accountant, 1 middleman." He spoke slowly, as if each word was painfully forced out of him. When the interrogation was over, Julian stepped out into the hallway, exhaled heavily, and turned to Allison. "We're starting to make arrests. From now on, every minute counts. They might try to escape. I've already prepared everything. The groups are in place." Ray nodded. "Do it." That same day, late in the evening, the operation began in different parts of the city and in the neighboring district. 10 addresses, 26 officers, 6 warrants. The streets were filled with cars with flashing lights. Doors rang in the entrances. Loud voices were heard in the corridors. "Police! Don't move!" Neighbors ran out onto the stairs. Reporters tried to break through the cordon. Sophie watched the news on the TV screen in her secure apartment. A reporter with a shaky camera reported that a police sergeant had been detained at the county courthouse and that the homes of 2 high-ranking officials were being searched. She hugged Noah, holding him close. "It's you, baby. You did it." He didn't understand, but nodded and said quietly, "I just didn't want him to go anywhere where there was a lot of noise anymore." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. Her son didn't realize that he had caused the destruction of a system that had lived like a parasite for years, hiding behind badges and uniforms. Late that evening, Julian stood on the roof of a building, looking out over the city at night. The wind was sharp, the sky was overcast, but somewhere far away, in a gap between them, he could see a single star. He felt tired, but it was different. Not from defeat, but from work. He knew that tomorrow would be the second wave. Trials, reports, defenses, attacks from the press. But today, at least for a moment, he could allow himself to just stand and look out over the city, knowing that one small truth had defeated many big lies. The city greeted the morning not with the noise of cars, but with the hum of voices. The same words were heard on all the local radio stations: a high-profile arrest, a police conspiracy, an exposure. The newspapers came out with the same headlines, in black and white. The system has cracked. Officer in uniform turned out to be a thief. A child showed the way to the truth. People in lines at coffee shops discussed details, passed on. Fragments of phrases. Did you hear that the judge was in on the case too? The one with the limp? I always thought he was weird. Silverdale was no longer the same, and no conversation avoided the name of a 3-year-old boy. At the city library, the media center staff were preparing an exhibit. Temporary, but important. A white canvas stretched along the wall showed a timeline of events, from Sophie Watson's first statement to Sergeant Blake Maddox's confession. In the center of the composition was a photo. Little Noah, standing on a bench in the courtroom, with surprise in his eyes and his index finger raised. Under the photo was the caption, "Truth does not require maturity, only courage." The atmosphere in the courthouse was rare for these walls, not solemnity, but an inner silence, as if justice itself had paused to catch its breath. Judge Holmes had spent the last 2 days signing orders, coordinating new commissions, and dealing with federal observers. His office resembled a military headquarters. On his desk were 2 cups of half-drunk tea, a stack of files, and a list of recommendations for reform. He knew his career would be over in a year, but now he was doing the most important thing he had ever done in his 30 years of service. "I thought I'd seen a lot of things," he told Prosecutor Ray as he sat down, "but never like this. And you know what, Julian? I don't feel any anger or shame, just relief." Ray nodded, holding up a fresh report. It talked about the formation of a new structure, an independent police oversight service. The name was still being discussed, but it was already being referred to informally. Protocol Noah. "We used to think that power creates security," he said quietly. "But it created fear. Now we need to restore what has been missing for a long time. Trust. Do you think it will work?" "Yes, because people are tired of being afraid. And now they have a reason to believe that something could be different." That same morning, Sophie and Noah came to the park near the library, where a temporary memorial was being installed. On the pedestal was a white marble slab with the words, "Light is born in simplicity." Next to it was a bronze sculpture of a little boy holding a car, looking into the distance. "Does he look like me?" Noah asked, looking at the sculpture. "Very," Sophie smiled, adjusting the collar of his jacket. "Only your eyes are warmer." Why is he looking there? Because that's where the future is. And he wants it to be honest. Sophie took her son's hand, and they walked past a group of school children on a field trip. One of the boys pointed at Noah and whispered something to his friend. She covered her mouth with her hand in surprise. Sophie felt people's eyes following them. And there was no judgment or pity in that look, only respect and gratitude. Later, at City Hall, the first public meeting of law enforcement officials with citizens took place. In the hall were parents, teachers, entrepreneurs, students. Among them was Sophie, invited as a witness whose voice had set the mechanism of change in motion. She was asked to say a few words. She went to the podium, paused for a second, looking at the audience, and then spoke. "I am an ordinary woman. I have a store, a son, and no legal education. But that day, I simply listened to my child, and it turned out to be the best decision in my life. We adults are used to complicating things, looking for confirmation, fearing consequences. But children just call things by their proper names. He saw and spoke, without fear, without doubt. And if he had not been heard, everything would have remained as it was. She paused. It's not my merit. It's the merit of a boy who is not afraid of the truth. I'm just a mother. And he is a little man who showed that justice does not begin with laws, but with an honest look. The applause was long but quiet, the way it is when people really feel something, not just express approval. Sophie returned to her seat, sat down next to Noah, who was holding a booklet with drawings in his hands. He looked at her and whispered softly, "And now it's all over?" "No," she replied. "It's just beginning." A week later, a march in support of police reform took place in the city. People came out with banners. Trust is not in form, but in actions. More cameras, less fear. Thank you, Noah. The city orchestra played a melody specially written in honor of the new beginning. Transparent balloons soared into the sky, reflecting in shop windows and storefronts, as a reminder that the truth is light but powerful. Meanwhile, at the kindergarten where Noah returned a month later, the teacher leaned over to him. "Do you know that you are a hero?" "No," he replied. "I just told my mother." He returned to his toys, building a tower of blocks once more. But now, at the top of it, stood a figure with a blue cap and a flag. He called it simply Truth. Late that night, Sophie sat in the kitchen, listening to Noah breathing softly in his sleep in the next room. On the table in front of her was a letter from the Department of Justice, a thank you, a certificate, and an offer to join the Community Council of the new probation service. She didn't know yet whether she would accept, but she was sure of one thing: she would no longer remain silent. It was raining outside, quietly, stubbornly, as if it wanted to wash the city clean, once and for all. Somewhere far away, a train was hooting, and there was something new in that sound. Not anxiety, but expectation. Sophie went to the window, pressed her forehead to the glass, and whispered, "Thank you, kid. You did what we couldn't. You showed that the truth is not afraid of stars on shoulder straps or oak tables. It just is. And if you name it, it starts moving." Her voice faded into silence, and in the morning it all started again, with hot coffee, school backpacks, new reports. But now this morning had one small meaning, the one carved into the stone near the library. Light is born in simplicity. And the boy's name next to it? Noah Watson. The one who pointed. The one who wasn't afraid. The one who became the beginning.